An excerpt from A God to Dance With, from the collection A Bright Symmetry. The woman's voice was little more than a whisper. He barely heard her over the sounds of the party. Really, Scott, I'm fine. I just have some things on my mind. Shifting from foot to foot, uncomfortable in the stiff formal shoes he had been forced to wear, Scott Madigan sipped his wine and looked around the ballroom. The brightly decorated hall was huge, able to accommodate the 300 guests with plenty of elbow room. Music from concealed speakers mixing with the myriad of conversations being carried out. To Scott, the hall looked like a basin filled with brightly colored confetti. The murmuring voices were nothing more than a dull droning that was beginning to grate on his nerves. Nice digs, he thought. Must be nice to be a Federation ambassador. Live on the side of a mountain, negotiate a treaty or two, host a party every now and again. Maybe that's what I need. Despite his advanced years, Scott looked to be a man in his early 40s. His blue eyes were half open, his expression reflecting the exhaustion he felt, and his blond hair fell limp around his head. To look at him, an observer might think he carried the weight of several worlds on his shoulders. A closer look would show the exhaustion running deeper, and the weight was the weight of centuries. Scott was tired of life, tired of working at scraping through dirt and rock in search of ancient history, tired of almost constant haggling and negotiating with the appropriations committees, trying to secure funding. He no longer wanted to attend useless parties that forced him into formal wear. He took another sip of wine and closed his eyes. Maybe it's time to change careers. Maybe it's time to change names and become someone else for a while. Maybe a century or two as someone else might be what I need. Scott opened his eyes and looked over the crowd again. You know, Zoe, I find myself not believing you. Several minutes passed before Scott realized he hadn't gotten an answer. He set his glass on a nearby table and turned. Zoe? To one side stood a cluster of chairs. He felt sadness come over him when he saw the woman sitting alone, watching the party with half-open eyes. That she was beautiful was obvious, the green dress chosen to accent her appearance. She seemed oblivious to the glances and stares directed at her. Her short red hair was brushed away from her face. Zoe's blue eyes lingered on the crowd a moment longer before she turned a faint smile toward him. I heard you, Scott. I just didn't feel like telling you again that I have some things on my mind. Scott watched her and tried to hide his concern. Zoe had always been active, full of life, and willing to take on any challenge. She had joined him as he traveled from world to world, assisting in his position as an independent mission coordinator. With each new experience, the two of them grew closer until they were nearly inseparable. The change had started months ago, so slight that Scott had at first missed it. The smile that usually brightened her face began to fade, and she began to spend time staring into space, her face blank. Whenever he asked, she would only say that she had some things on her mind. Scott retrieved his wine glass and took a seat. You've been saying that for months. I've known people to dwell on things, but this is a bit much. It's been 14 years, Scott. I think I'm entitled to keep a few secrets. Besides, I know how your mind works. You wouldn't let it go, even if I put it into words. Zoe sighed, took Scott's hand, and looked into the crowd. I just don't feel up for this party. Maybe you should have stayed up in our rooms or up on Charlene Levitch with Namira. Zoe raised her left hand to show the bare wrist. A little late for second thoughts, isn't it? Besides, we left our transmat bracelets upstairs. At any rate, it's bad taste to mat out in the middle of a party. Depends on whether or not you care about insulting your host. Zoe's smile grew slightly, and she sat back in her chair. Zoe watched her, then turned to the crowd. Most of the party guests were native to the planet Stelvra, though there were a fair number of humans and beings that looked human. Despite the bright colors of the formal robes worn by the two dominant castes, the Stelvrans reminded Scott of mounds of gray-green clay, with long, supple tentacles in place of arms and short, stubby legs. Large, bulbous eyes dominated their faces, filling the area above their misshapen mouths. The Stelvrans were at ease, but Scott could feel the tension underlying the party atmosphere. Scott had heard of unrest on Stelvra as he and Zoe were preparing to accompany close friends on their expedition to find the resting place of the Stelvran god Caeraltan. Scott preferred burial site. Both the religious and political castes claimed to be the ones chosen by Caeraltan to lead the Stelvran race, and both were unyielding in their belief. There hadn't been any reports of violence, but Scott couldn't help but feel they were pressing their luck by staying longer than necessary. Zoe read the thoughts as they played across his face. "What's the matter, Scott? Don't you trust them? They've been all right so far." "So far. But the reports I saw before he came down mentioned increasing tension between the two castes. I've seen enough tension turn into revolution when things were all right." Scott looked down at the floor and swallowed. "I just wish you'd open up to me again." Zoe sighed and leaned forward. "There's no time for us." Scott tried to keep his face neutral, even as he felt his heart sink. It was a statement he had heard too many times in his long life. "What do you mean by no time?" he asked. "Scott, I'm 34 years old. With modern medical science, I'll live to be 150, 200 years old. You, on the other hand, will live forever. When I was younger, having an immortal lover was exciting. Now it's just..." Her voice trailed off, and she sighed again. "There's no time for us." "I can't help what I am, Zoe. Being immortal is not a decision I would have made. We may only have another 100 years or so, but..." "But what, Scott? What do you want me to do? Ignore it?" "In all honesty, yes. I've had to for nearly 2,800 years. Believe me, it's harder on me than it is on you." "At least my problems will eventually end." "You're right. That's so much better." A thin smile crossed Zoe's face. "Who knows? Maybe great Caeraltan will rise again and make me immortal." A nearby group of Stelvrans wearing the green and gold robes of the religious caste turned to them, apparently hearing what Zoe had said. "You spoke of great Caeraltan, Krital?" One Stelvran croaked, his deep voice sounding like it bubbled up from the bottom of a well. Scott forced an insincere smile onto his face. "Yes, Ritanva. My companion and I were just discussing the sleeping god. Perhaps you could tell her the legend of great Caeraltan." The largest of the four, whose robe was festooned with copper and brass ornaments, took on an air of great insult. "Caeraltan is not a legend, Krital. Great Caeraltan raised our race from death when our noble ancestors teetered on the brink of extinction." Another of the group stepped forward. "In ancient times, when our people lay near death, Caeraltan descended from the heavens. With a wave, he brought food from the land to nourish us. He raised us from our infancy and set us on the true path." Scott closed his eyes. If he had been in a better frame of mind, the Stalvern's growing fervor would have been amusing. And wouldn't he be proud of all you've done? What would Caeralton say about what you've done with this world? Zoe waited for the Stalvern to respond. When none did, she leaned forward and continued. Instead of being one race, united in its march towards a future, your people have splintered into at least 2 factions fighting for control. You disgrace his memory. We do not fight for control, Krital, the leader said, anger becoming obvious in his voice. We struggle against the infidels who have overthrown the righteous government Caeralton established. Scott stood and helped Zoe to her feet. Revolution is still revolution. War is still war, no matter how you rationalize it. According to my reading, Caeralton taught peace, understanding, and acceptance of others despite their differences. Does your government continue these precepts? The Stalvern stared. You do not understand, Krital. Soon great Caeralton will rise up and herald the coming age. You're right. I don't understand. Scott scanned the crowd again, excused himself, and started for the windows that filled one wall of the ballroom, Zoe close behind. I was beginning to enjoy that, Zoe whispered. I always like annoying fanatics. Wonderful, Scott muttered. All the things to get enthusiastic about. By the windows stood a human male dressed in the same formal attire. His long brown hair was pulled back into a tail. He tugged at the stiff shirt collar as Scott and Zoe approached. Nathan Chedraki, one of Scott's oldest mortal friends, looked more ill at ease than Scott himself. He seemed anxious, impatient with delays that kept him from their goal. How's it going, Nate? Scott stepped up to the window. The lights of Stalver's capital city of Greshna glowed in the distance. Looking down, Scott saw the single pool of light that marked the entrance to Caeralton's tomb. Nathan said, If I hear one more Stalvern tell me that Caeralton will rise and vindicate their actions, I'm going to start bleeding from my ears. I wish I was going with you to the catacombs. Well, sometimes it's good to be the mission coordinator. Does Namira have anything else for us? The communications staff is still monitoring the media outlets. Both casts are saying that Caeralton is about to rise, and both are claiming that they're the chosen ones. Hopefully civil war won't break out while we're still here. Nathan sipped his drink and glanced at Zoe. Hey, is everything all right, Zoe? Fine, Nathan, Zoe whispered. You don't look fine. Maybe you should go back up to the ship. Zoe sighed and a disgusted look crossed her face. I'm getting tired of hearing people say that. As I've been telling Scott, I had things running through my mind. I am with you till the end. Nate, where's Lauren? She went with Minister Janah to get the archivist who oversees the catacombs. With luck, you'll be able to go down tonight. If only I had that kind of luck. Nathan leaned to one side and nodded. Did I mention the Federation ambassador is going to be joining you? Before Scott could answer, a woman's voice came from behind. I hope that does not cause a problem. I have always been interested in archaeology. Ambassador Trebin of Vastalara stepped around to Nathan's side. Though she resembled a main-breed human, Scott knew it was only an assumed form. Physically weak in their natural aspects, the race of telepathic shapeshifters assumed the form of other races to better interact. Of course not, Tar, Ambassador. I'm just feeling impatient. We've come a long way to find Caeralton, and I don't need a party holding me up any longer. I've never been much for formal occasions either. Perhaps you wish to be present when the sleeping god awakens? The legends say that whoever touches Caeralton at the moment he awakens will become the host for his essence and attain immortality. Is that what you wish? Scott's laugh was short, more like a grunt. I'm already 2,800 years old. Barring the complete vaporization of my body, I'm already going to live forever. At any rate, I think we'll find a decomposed body, not a sleeping, all-powerful being. Carrollton is as much a legend as the Bellantire. Nathan said, "You'll have to excuse my mission coordinator, Ambassador. Being immortal has made him cynical." Quiet beeping came from Nathan's left wrist. "Excuse me." He turned to the window and tapped his comm band. "Chidraki." "Nate, it's Lauren. The archivist has agreed to take Scott, Zoe, and Ambassador Trebin into the catacombs. Minister Janal will be joining them, and he wants to get going as soon as possible. Tell Scott I know how much he wants to stay at the party, but he really has no choice." Scott tapped his own comm band. "Yeah, you're right, Lauren. This party has been the highlight of my entire life. Tell the minister and the archivist we'll be down after we've changed clothes." "Lauren, what about me?" Nathan's comm band was silent for a moment. "Sorry, Nate. The ambassador wants to talk to you. Details," he said. "All right. I'll be there. Next time I get to be the mission coordinator. Be careful down there." "Aren't I always?" "Call Namira and tell him to keep a lock on our comm bands, just in case." Trebin looked surprised. "You expect trouble?" "This planet is a powder keg, Ambassador. I may be able to survive most anything, but that doesn't apply to you and Zoe." Zoe's laugh was hollow, and her smile was anything but sincere. "Scott's not happy unless he's worrying about someone." "I prefer to think of it as being prepared. And when was the last time I worried for no reason? Now, if you'll excuse us, we'll meet you by the staircase, Ambassador. You'll make our apologies, Nate." With Zoe holding his arm, Scott started through the crowd. "I don't know what you want me to do, Zoe," he thought. "I've had to live with the knowledge that the people I love are going to die. All I can do is accept the inevitable." The old god slept. It had been uncounted millennia since the god retired to his resting place beneath the surface of his adopted world. He had discovered the world purely by chance as he traveled the cold darkness between stars. For uncounted millennia he slept, undisturbed, dreaming of the work he had wrought on the nameless world and the forms he had found native to it. Memories drifted through his mind. He remembered walking among the natives, feeling amused as they knelt in supplication around him. Before he remembered his arrival, feeling pity as the ancestors of his worshippers greeted him by either running or attacking him with spears and stone tools. He remembered being offered food by beings that barely had enough to feed themselves, let alone share with a stranger who appeared from the sky. He vowed to help the race before it vanished into the mists of time. The work had taken millennia. Each generation painfully shown the necessary skills to pull the race back from the brink of extinction. The race began to come together under chosen leadership as he counseled and guided. He never did any of the work himself. That would have accomplished nothing. Rather, he only suggested, then stepped aside to watch the people work, watch them learn, watch them grow. After a millennia, feeling physically tired and nearly unable to continue, he decided it was time to rest. The crying and wailing of an entire race echoed through his dreaming mind. None of them understood, didn't want to understand, refused to understand that after the long millennia of work, it had been time to rest. They could only stand on their own now, chart their own destiny, and discover their future. They understood that he was completely unlike them despite outward appearances. But accepting was not understanding. The simple act of teaching the race to understand took 2 more centuries, further tiring him. He wanted nothing special when the time came. He only wanted to be remembered as a being that did what he thought was right. He wanted no ceremony, no temple, Just a quiet place beneath the surface where he could sleep undisturbed. The chosen leaders were good beings that could lead the race without his guidance. He went to his warm place and slept. Uncounted millennia passed. The old god slept. Slowly, beyond his notice, the race, the world, the universe changed.